It was supposed to be a journey of adventure and purpose, a voyage into the Caribbean sun that instead sailed straight into the unknown. In December 1988, a rusty 82-foot freighter named the Freedom departed Miami with 9 people on board, never to be seen again. In mid-December 1988, 23-year-old Lisa Lynn Bishop eagerly joined the crew of the freighter Freedom for what was supposed to be a meaningful trip to Haiti. Lisa was a college journalism student from Atlanta, Georgia, known for her adventurous spirit and passion for writing. She had met the Freedom's captain, 28-year-old Florian Meyer-Borsch, a German national, at an Atlanta nightclub owned by her boyfriend, Paul Cornwell. Described by Lisa's mother as a drifter, Florian had sailed the Caribbean before and sometimes went by the alias David. When Florian invited Lisa to come along on the Freedom's voyage to document the journey, Lisa was thrilled by the opportunity. Bizarrely, she hoped to write an article highlighting the stark economic contrasts between the wealth of America and the poverty of Haiti. I'll be dissecting this supposed reason for going along on the trip later, but for now, I'll just say, this is a highly unusual reason for boarding a dilapidated vessel and sailing to Haiti. Lisa's loved ones, however, had misgivings from the start. Her parents, Bill and Linda Bishop, and her longtime boyfriend Paul all urged her not to go, sensing something was off. Despite these warnings, on December 17, 1988, Lisa and Florian left Atlanta for Miami to embark on the journey. That afternoon, around 2:30 p.m., tugboats guided the Freedom down the Miami River and out to sea, bound for the port of Gonabs on Haiti's northwest coast. The ship allegedly carried humanitarian supplies for Haiti, and a crew of 7 Haitian men, in addition to Florian and Lisa. The Freedom never arrived in Haiti. By all accounts, weather conditions had been calm, and no distress calls were ever received from the freighter. Yet somewhere along the 600-mile route past Cuba, the ship simply vanished. When Christmas Day 1988 came and went with no phone call from Lisa, who had promised to call her family upon arrival, her parents knew something was very wrong. The Bishops were not alone. Relatives of the Haitian crew members were also growing frantic when none of the 9 people on board checked in for the holidays. Within days, worried families contacted the Coast Guard to report the Freedom overdue and missing. The Coast Guard launched search flights along the Freedom's intended path through the old Bahama Channel, the well-traveled passage between Florida and Haiti. For several days in early January 1989, U.S. Coast Guard jets crisscrossed the Caribbean waters looking for any sign of wreckage or survivors. They found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no radio signals. Lisa's distraught parents flew to Miami to conduct their own inquiries in the weeks after the disappearance. They spoke to Florian Meyer-Borsch's acquaintances and anyone who might have information, but turned up few clues. Desperate and grief-stricken, Linda and Bill Bishop could do little but hope and pray. With each passing week, the likelihood of the Freedom meeting a deadly fate seemed to grow. Many assumed the ship must have sunk without a trace, a tragedy of the sea that left 9 families in limbo. Yet the ocean was keeping its secrets, and an eerie silence hung over the fate of the Freedom. Then a shocking lead emerged that would raise even more questions. 4 months after the Freedom disappeared, an astonishing tip gave the families a glimmer of hope. In April 1989, a professional underwater salvager named Bob Nyberg happened to read a newspaper article about the missing freighter. The name Freedom jumped off the page at him since he had done a double take when he saw the ship, assuming it was supposed to be named Freedom. He even made a snarky remark about the spelling to a friend right after he saw the ship, providing some degree of corroboration, though the friend didn't see the ship. Bob realized he had seen that very ship in the Georgetown harbor of Grand Cayman Island, roughly 500 miles west of Haiti. Disturbingly, this sighting was in early January 1989, a time when the Frieden should already have been missing at sea. This stunning eyewitness account electrified Lisa's family and friends. If Bob Nyberg truly saw the ship in the Cayman Islands after it disappeared, that meant the ship hadn't sunk immediately. Lisa's parents began to believe that she was likely alive, but being held against her will, since she hadn't contacted anyone. Clinging to this hopeful possibility, Lisa's boyfriend Paul Cornwell teamed up with Bob Nyberg to investigate further. In May 1989, the two traveled to Grand Cayman to retrace Nyberg's steps. They went around the docks asking questions and remarkably turned up multiple witnesses who claimed to have seen the German on the island around that same time. Florian was reportedly not alone either, and locals recalled he was accompanied by a short man with dark hair. Back in Atlanta, Paul sought out a woman who had been holding some of Florian's personal belongings while he was away. Among Florian's effects, Paul discovered a photograph of Florian standing with an unknown man who fit the description of the Cayman companion. The woman identified the mystery man and dropped a bombshell. This individual, Felipe, wasn't only Florian's friend. He was the one who had actually chartered the Frieden for its ill-fated voyage to Haiti. In other words, he had organized or funded the trip. The woman further claimed that this mysterious figure mentioned being involved in a large-scale smuggling ring. This ominous hint suggested that the Frieden's quote-unquote humanitarian voyage may have been a cover for criminal activity. It also suggested that Lisa, the lone woman on board, might have stumbled into danger unknowingly. Despite authorities in multiple countries taking interest in the case, progress was frustratingly slow. Florian Meyer-Borsch, who was wanted for questioning by both U.S. and international agencies, never resurfaced to explain what happened. Felipe's full identity remained uncertain, and as months turned into years, the trail for the missing ship and crew grew cold. The brief hope sparked by the Grand Cayman sighting faded, and no further verified sightings of the vessel or crew materialized. Notably, none of the Haitian crewmen aboard ever contacted their families again after December 1988. Even Florian's own parents in Germany told investigators they hadn't heard from their son since the ship's disappearance. Every indication was that whatever befell the Frieden had likely been deadly, yet without any physical evidence, the case remained a nightmare of ambiguity. What really happened to Lisa Bishop and the crew of the Frieden has been subjected to significant speculation over the years. Early on, many assumed the simplest explanation. Perhaps the Frieden sank in a sudden catastrophe, such as a rogue wave or structural failure, drowning everyone aboard. Indeed, the complete absence of wreckage or calls for help suggests a swift, all-consuming disaster at sea. However, this theory clashes with the credible testimony that the ship was seen safely harbored weeks after leaving Miami. If the Frieden had sunk, there obviously couldn't have been such credible sightings of the ship or Florian and the mysterious figure. The timing of Nyberg's sighting effectively ruled out an immediate accidental sinking. Another grim scenario points to piracy or a criminal ambush on the high seas. In the late 1980s, Caribbean waters weren't entirely safe from modern pirates or smugglers. Some suggest the Frieden might have been targeted by traffickers or other criminal elements who seized the ship for its cargo or for nefarious purposes. Under this theory, those on board could have been slain or set adrift. The fact that Felipe, the man who chartered the Frieden, was linked to smuggling operations bolsters the idea that illegal business was afoot. It's conceivable that a deal went bad. Perhaps the Frieden was transporting contraband, and an organized crime group intercepted it, eliminating witnesses. However, if this was accurate, this begs the question of why Florian was spared if he wasn't in on the operation in some way. Perhaps the most disturbing theory is the possibility that Lisa met a fate worse than death. Some have speculated that Lisa Bishop was kept alive and trafficked after the Frieden's disappearance. In this scenario, Florian and any co-conspirators might have intentionally lured Lisa on the trip to hand her over to criminals involved in trafficking. Some have hypothesized that the crew could have been eliminated and Lisa trafficked by Florian himself. This would explain why Florian was seen weeks later with the man who chartered the vessel. An even darker twist on this suggests that the Haitian crew members, of whom little is known, could have been subjected to an illicit organ harvesting operation on the high seas. Yet another angle considers geopolitics. Given that the Frieden's route skirted near Cuban waters, one theory claims that perhaps the ship strayed off course and was intercepted by Cuban authorities. During the Cold War era, there were incidents of Cuban forces detaining vessels and crews. Some have questioned if Cuba secretly captured the Frieden, perhaps eliminating those on board and never admitting it. However, there's no corroboration for this scenario, and it seems less likely than piracy or smuggling. Still, others believe that Lisa may never have made it to Miami at all, since there's never been any independent verification that she boarded the ship. That said, the authorities have worked under the assumption that she was on the ship, and it's possible that they know something that they haven't disclosed to the general public. In truth, Florian Meyer-Borsch himself remains the biggest enigma and the prime suspect in the eyes of authorities. Investigators believe Florian knows, or knew, exactly what happened on that voyage. He may have orchestrated a scheme with the mysterious man, whether it was running drugs, weapons, or something else, and the plan went horribly wrong. It's also possible Florian was an unwitting pawn who got in over his head. The fact that Florian never resurfaced, not even to contact his own worried parents, suggests he was deeply entangled in whatever dark fate befell the Frieden. If he's alive, he has been in hiding for over 35 years. Law enforcement still wants to question Florian Meyer-Borsch, but he has effectively become a ghost. Felipe, whose last name and full identity were never confirmed publicly, is similarly elusive. Without them, the full truth of the Frieden may never surface. The more I think of Lisa Bishop's decision to board the Frieden, the less it holds together. Not emotionally, not practically, not logically. She wasn't a seasoned journalist embedded with a legitimate aid organization. She was a 23-year-old college student, invited at the last minute by a drifting nightclub acquaintance to tag along on a decaying freighter crewed by strangers. The premise sold to her, that she'd somehow document Haitian poverty from the deck of a rusty cargo ship, was paper thin. There was no publication lined up, no editor waiting, no clear plan beyond vague ideals and romanticized risk. Even the logistics don't make sense. Serious reporting requires access, safety, and structure. Lisa had none of that. She wasn't fluent in the language, wasn't affiliated with a relief group, and wasn't traveling with fixers. She was essentially being asked to wander into one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere, aboard a ship captained by a man who raised red flags for everyone except her. My guess is that Florian used a classic romance scheme to lure her and then turned around and sold her. Personally, I have some doubts she even got on the ship. Florida has long served as a grim setting for some of America's most depraved criminals, but few figures embodied such a profound betrayal of public trust as Gerard Schaefer. Known chillingly as the killer cop, Schaefer weaponized the authority granted to him by the state. He wore a badge and a crisp uniform, exploiting the very trust he was sworn to uphold to lure, abduct, and eliminate young women in the swamps and backwoods of the Sunshine State. But for all the terror he inflicted, the true extent of his rampage remains an unsolved mystery, even decades later. Schaefer's turbulent childhood and subsequent failure in conventional life appear to have been foundational to his later pathology. Born in Wisconsin in 1946, he spent his youth frequently relocating. He described his early life as troubled, attributed in part to his father's alcoholism and everything that came with that. Despite being an outwardly promising student and an avid outdoorsman, even aspiring to be a forest ranger, Schaefer harbored increasingly dark private obsessions. By his mid-teens, he developed intense, deviant thoughts focused towards women. Before pivoting to law enforcement, Schaefer attempted a career in education, likely in hopes of access to potential victims. He enrolled in college and achieved average grades while aiming for a teaching degree. However, this career path dissolved quickly. Schaefer was fired from 2 separate student teaching internships in 1969 and 1970. Superiors noted his arrogance, poor subject knowledge, and his persistent efforts to impose his weird moral and political opinions on his students. The eventual decision to join the Martin County Sheriff's Department in 1972 was highly calculated. Schaefer successfully obtained the position despite forging a letter of recommendation, which is disturbing in and of itself. The analysis of his life suggests this move wasn't a genuine career aspiration, but rather a mechanism to gain the authority over others he desired so much. The badge provided immediate, absolute power and a perfect disguise for luring victims, particularly hitchhikers or women in vulnerable circumstances. Schaefer's criminal career was brought to an abrupt halt following the astonishing escape of 2 young women in 1972. While serving as a deputy, Schaefer abducted 2 girls. Both were subjected to horror, yet they miraculously managed to escape separately. One girl was found staggering through the woods, and approximately 45 minutes later, officers found the other distressed near a riverbank, her clothing shredded. Their harrowing survival proved to be the pivotal moment in Schaefer's downfall. The surviving victims became crucial witnesses in Schaefer's subsequent trial in 1973 for the slaying of 2 teenage girls. Although Schaefer pleaded not guilty, maintaining a cold and aloof demeanor throughout the proceedings, the state presented a compelling case. The abductees not only testified about their abduction, but critically, reenacted on video the precise methods Schaefer used to bind them. This unusual signature technique provided a concrete link between the 2 survivors and the 2 girls whose lives he had cut tragically short. Schaefer was convicted and sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment. Unfortunately, the evidence gathered suggested there had been many more victims. The physical evidence recovered from his property strongly suggests a much larger scale of depravity, cementing his status as a prolific predator linked to as many as 30 killings. During the search of his residence, investigators found more than just circumstantial evidence. They uncovered the trophies of a classic serial killer. The investigation yielded a trove of disturbing personal effects belonging to missing women, which served as relics of his sick acts. These items included a gold locket inscribed with the name Lee, which belonged to Lee Hainline Bonadies, a former neighbor who had been missing since September 1969. Also recovered were a driver's license belonging to Barbara Ann Wilcox and a passport belonging to Colette Marie Goodenough, both of whom vanished in January 1973. The presence of these belongings confirms that Schaefer actively collected mementos to psychologically relive his disturbing acts. Most damningly, authorities recovered teeth and sections of bone on his property that were later identified as belonging to at least 8 distinct victims. This discovery of physical human remains, combined with the multiple pieces of identification, linked him to these missing women. This provided overwhelming forensic support for the theory that Schaefer was an active and highly successful serial predator. By May 1973, investigators had assembled sufficient physical and circumstantial data to connect Schaefer to approximately 28 individuals. The span of his suspected crimes stretched from October 1966 to January 1973. The most terrifying evidence recovered wasn't forensic in the traditional sense, but literary. Police uncovered over 300 pages of gruesome writings penned by Schaefer. Written from the perspective of a killer known as the Ghoul, the stories contained meticulous details of kidnapping and execution. These writings, which prosecutors strongly suggested were thinly veiled accounts of his actual crimes, offered profound insight into Schaefer's psychological structure. He was categorized as a textbook case of the classic serial killer whose personality was driven by hatred and violence. Serving 2 life terms, Schaefer was incarcerated at Florida State Prison, where he remained obsessed with control. Even behind bars, he exerted power through manipulative lawsuits and by continuing to author quote-unquote fictional works. A particularly telling indicator of his grandiose narcissism was his perceived rivalry with fellow inmate, the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. Schaefer reveled in his own brutality, reportedly taunting Bundy as an inferior predator who couldn't compete with him. At the same time, the authorities had been working hard behind the scenes to bring further charges against him for all his crimes. But it turned out that this wouldn't be necessary, and a brutal form of prison justice would ultimately be the end of this prolific predator. Also, there's a certain cope involved in Schaefer claiming to be the superior predator to Bundy, since Schaefer clearly wanted some of the recognition Bundy had and has. After all, Schaefer, despite the breadth of his sick acts, is virtually completely unknown. Schaefer's reign of terror definitively ended on December 3, 1995, inside Florida State Prison. Now, normally I don't go into gruesome details, but I'll make a little exception here for this sick puppy. Schaefer was found dead in his cell at age 49, having been stabbed over 40 times in the face, head, neck, and body, with his throat also slashed. Officially, a fellow inmate, Vincent Faustino Rivera, killed Schaefer during an argument, purportedly over a cup of hot water. However, a broader understanding of his prison history suggests this may have been an act of retribution. Schaefer was suspected of being a prison informant, and in the year leading up to his death, he had already been targeted by inmates who repeatedly hurled literal crap at him. They also set part of his cell on fire, and some have speculated that prison guards weren't too inclined to put themselves at risk to intervene in his defense. Interestingly, the families of some of his victims came out in favor of this act, viewing the prisoners as having done what the state that empowered him never did. In my view, the lack of further convictions in the Schaefer saga says less about the strength of the evidence and far more about the uncomfortable position the state found itself in. Once the full scope of his crimes began to surface, every additional charge risked reopening an embarrassing truth. Florida had handed a badge, a gun, and institutional legitimacy to a man who never should have made it past the first interview. His forged recommendation letter wasn't subtle, his behavioral red flags weren't hidden, and his short, chaotic history and teaching already showed a pattern of inappropriate conduct. Yet he was hired anyway, granted authority immediately, and allowed unlimited access to vulnerable people. Pursuing dozens of additional cases would have required putting that failure front and center. Each new indictment would have invited another round of scrutiny about how a man with such glaring psychological and professional defects was ever empowered as a deputy. And after his 1973 convictions locked him away for life, I personally suspect that the incentive to keep digging evaporated. With Schaefer dead in 1995, the system quietly closed the door. It was easier to let the unanswered cases remain in the shadows than to acknowledge how deeply he'd exploited the uniform the state gave him. In the early hours of Christmas Eve 2009, a couple walking along a Miami Beach shoreline made a chilling discovery: the body of an enormous man floating face down in the surf. They dragged the stranger to shore and attempted to resuscitate him, but he was already gone. No one present knew who this towering victim was, or how he ended up alone in the ocean on that Christmas Eve. Police observed that the John Doe was exceptionally large, around 6 feet 9 inches tall and 335 pounds, and likely in his 30s or 40s. He carried no identification, complicating efforts to name him. The man was found wearing only a pair of blue Speedo swim trunks, along with black socks and New Balance sneakers. It was an odd outfit if he was just planning on going for a swim, since last I checked, people don't generally wear their shoes in the water. He had short brown hair and brown eyes. His lower legs and ankles were hairless, as if recently shaven. He also had an extremely distinctive facial appearance, with wide-set eyes and a pronounced brow bone noted by examiners. And if you're one of those people who just listen, check the screen, because I'm not exaggerating when I say his facial features are highly distinctive. There were no obvious signs of trauma, and at first police couldn't determine if his death was an accident or involved foul play. An autopsy soon confirmed that the cause of death was drowning, and the medical examiner found about 2 liters of seawater in the man's lungs. Toxicology tests revealed he had alcohol and codeine in his system, which suggests he may have been impaired in the moments before his death. Crucially, the examiners found no injuries or signs of struggle, supporting the theory of an accidental drowning over any violent scenario. Investigators initially thought identification would be an open and shut case. It seemed impossible that a man of this size could just disappear without anyone noticing. Yet the case quickly proved stubborn. Detectives scoured missing person reports across Florida and beyond, chasing down any lead on unusually tall, heavy-set missing men. At least 12 potential matches were compared and ruled out through fingerprints, dental records, or DNA. One by one, each lead fell apart. An older Florida case looked promising until the eye color didn't match. Another missing man of similar stature was eliminated because he had distinctive tattoos that the John Doe lacked. Investigators even considered an international angle. For example, an Italian man who vanished from a cruise ship. But that too was a dead end. In perhaps the most startling lead, the man closely resembled a Canadian outlaw biker who disappeared years earlier. Despite the timeline not adding up, genetic testing was done, and it was proven that it wasn't him. Despite extensive efforts, by the end of it all, the Miami Beach John Doe remained unidentified, defying investigators' expectations. And personally, I can see why, since this may be the most visually distinctive John Doe I've ever covered on my channel, and his case received fairly wide attention at the time. With official avenues exhausted, public speculation began to fill the void. His shaved legs led some to suspect he was an athlete or bodybuilder who removed body hair for competition. Others wondered if he was a traveler who fell overboard from a boat or cruise ship, which might explain the absence of local missing person reports. Others believed he may have been a local out for a late-night swim, but despite the Speedo, I don't really like this idea given that his shoes and socks were on. As of today, this giant John Doe from 2009 is still unidentified, defying all expectations. Periodic media coverage and crowdsourced campaigns have tried to uncover his name, but no family or friend has come forward with answers. Personally, I think he's very likely to be an international traveler with no meaningful ties in Florida. I don't see any other way that no one would have come forward with his identity when his case became fairly widely publicized. Now, I know this is where you might think I'm going to talk about the wonders of forensic genetic genealogy and how that will give him his name back, but I doubt it here. Due to privacy laws and a couple of other factors, this method only seems to work well for people from the United States, Canada, and Australia. For over a week, a frightened man in Florida carried the weight of a terrible secret. He had seen a young woman brutally slain in a remote sugarcane field outside Belle Glade, and her desperate last pleas still echoed in his mind. Hiding among the tall stalks, the anonymous hunter watched as two men argued with the woman by a blue Ford Bronco. She begged a man she called Ricardito for mercy, but the confrontation turned fatal when he struck her repeatedly with a machete. Afterwards, the horrified witness saw the attackers drag the woman's body deeper into the cane field and drive away. He caught only a glimpse of the Bronco's license plate containing the numbers 7 and 2. Fearing for his own life and aware that he'd been trespassing to hunt, the witness, who gave the name Antonio, waited more than a week before finally calling the authorities. Antonio's delayed call, made nervously in Spanish to a Miami emergency dispatcher, provided just enough clues for authorities to begin their investigation. He directed police to a landmark near the crime scene, a building shaped like an ice cream cone in the Belle Glade area. Palm Beach County detectives recognized this description as the local Twisty Treat ice cream stand, and they rushed to search the fields behind it. There, just as Antonio had described, detectives discovered the remains of a female victim concealed in the tall grass about a mile south of the shop. Finding the body was only the beginning of a difficult investigation. The victim's remains were badly decomposed, indicating she had been lying out in the Florida heat for roughly a week or more. The attack had been vicious. An autopsy determined the woman died from multiple deep-cutting wounds consistent with a machete, reflecting a horrifying level of brutality. Because of advanced decomposition, the corpse was already transitioning into a mummified state. Identifying the victim was a challenge. Most of her fingers had skeletonized, but detectives managed to obtain one viable thumbprint from her right hand. Incredibly, that single thumbprint was enough to confirm the victim's identity as Rebecca Young, a local young woman who had been reported missing in Belle Glade. Rebecca Young was just 21 years old at the time of her death and a longtime resident of the Belle Glade community. In a cruel twist of fate, investigators learned that violence had already touched Rebecca's life years before. When Rebecca was only 12, her own mother had been slain, an event that left deep scars on Rebecca. After that tragedy, Rebecca was raised by her aunt, Lucille Williams, with whom she shared a close bond. As detectives dug into Rebecca's background for clues, they uncovered signs that her life had taken a difficult turn in the years leading up to her slaying. After high school, Rebecca became involved with an older man known around town as a petty criminal. This man, whose sources called her quote-unquote boyfriend, drew Rebecca into a dangerous lifestyle, introduced her to illegal substances, and forced her into illicit work. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that while he may have sold her the boyfriend line, I'm thinking he was something else entirely. Police initially wondered if this quote-unquote boyfriend could be tied to Rebecca's death, given his criminal background and violent behavior. However, after investigation, he was ruled out as a direct suspect, as there was no evidence placing him at the scene. He also didn't fit the description of either of the men who were described by Antonio in the frantic call to the cops. Even so, detectives believe that his criminal activities indirectly set the stage for Rebecca's slaying. One theory is that this man may have angered dangerous individuals in the local drug underworld, and that Rebecca ultimately paid the price for his actions. In other words, Rebecca might have been targeted in retaliation for someone else's wrongdoing. With Rebecca's identity confirmed and her background uncovered, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office pressed forward to find her killers. They had scant physical evidence from the crime scene, so detectives focused on leads from the 911 call and the streets of Belle Glade. Antonio, the eyewitness, had provided a few critical details. One perpetrator's nickname, Ricardito, the description of two Hispanic males, and the blue Ford Bronco, with a partial license plate containing 7 and 2. Police checked records for vehicles matching the description and canvassed local informants for any mention of someone named Ricardito. Unfortunately, the nickname didn't immediately match any known suspects in the area. A breakthrough hint surfaced about 3 weeks after the slaying. On May 14, 1991, the sheriff's department detained a local man who had allegedly told a lady of the night that he had slain a woman who met Rebecca's description recently. Disturbingly, this wasn't told to her as some sort of direct threat, but rather as some sort of chilling boast about what he had allegedly done. This individual, whose name has never been released publicly, became a prime person of interest. Detectives located him driving a blue vehicle and used a traffic stop as a pretext to bring him in for questioning. The situation grew even more suspicious when, before investigators even mentioned any further crimes, the man blurted out that he knew they wanted to talk to him about a slaying. This unsolicited statement raised red flags, as it suggested he was aware of Rebecca's case or had a guilty conscience. Detectives attempted to interview the man, but the suspect quickly invoked his right to an attorney and refused to answer questions. Lacking any hard evidence tying him to the crime, the police had no choice but to release him from custody. Despite the setback, investigators remained convinced that this unnamed individual was involved. With the investigation stalling, law enforcement's best hope was to find the one person who saw everything, the mysterious caller known only as Antonio. Detectives launched an all-out search for this Good Samaritan witness, emphasizing that he was not in any trouble and could hold the key to solving the case. Little is known about Antonio beyond the brief call he made. He told the 911 dispatcher that he was using a payphone because he had no phone at home. This suggested he might have been from a poorer community or was working as a migrant laborer, and perhaps may have been in the United States illegally. From his accent and language, police believe Antonio is likely Cuban. Unfortunately, despite numerous calls for Antonio to come forward, he has never resurfaced. Unsurprisingly, it hasn't been all that easy to locate a Cuban guy in Miami named Antonio, at least, not the correct one. Decades have now passed since Rebecca Young's life was viciously cut short, and there's been little in the way of progress. Her family and the community have never forgotten the quiet young woman who fell victim to such a cruel fate. At present, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office continues to treat the case as an active and ongoing investigation, despite the fact that the case has gone cold. Personally, I think that the key to the case is the so-called boyfriend. I suspect he knows exactly who did it and why. On a warm Thursday in February 2021, Naomi Bolivar told her parents she was going to walk at the Ann Kolb Nature Center in Hollywood, Florida. It was a place she loved for its serene trails and bird-watching spots. She left home around 4 p.m. to catch a bus, and even sent a cheerful selfie to a friend from an observation tower in the park around 6 p.m. But minutes later, Naomi stopped responding to messages, and by 6:15 that evening, her phone had gone dark, flickering on mysteriously only hours after she went missing. She never made it to her planned 7 p.m. Zoom meeting that night, and her family's concern quickly escalated from there. Outwardly, Naomi was a devout member of her church and an avid self-described nature girl who spent countless hours watching birds and exploring the outdoors. In late 2020, she graduated from Brigham Young University, Idaho, with a degree in wildlife ecology, hoping to work for the National Park Service one day. Naomi also coped with high-functioning autism, and while she was very bright, her family noted that she tended to be naive socially. By early 2021, she was living at home, searching for jobs. She was disappointed about missing out on an internship at Everglades National Park, but she was already applying to other opportunities and stayed optimistic. February 11th, 2021, started like any other day for Naomi. That afternoon, she told her mother she needed some fresh air and planned to visit the nearby nature preserve to clear her head. Surveillance footage later confirmed Naomi boarded a Broward County bus alone around 4:30 that afternoon. She was seen disembarking near the Ann Kolb Nature Center along the Intracoastal Waterway. For the next hour or so, Naomi wandered the trails and took in the scenery. At about 6 p.m., she was at the park's observation tower enjoying the view. She took a selfie from that vantage point and sent it via Snapchat to a close college friend in another state, texting casually about her day. Nothing seemed amiss in their conversation. It was just a normal, casual exchange, according to the friend. However, shortly after that 6 p.m. check-in, all communication from Naomi ceased. By 6:15 p.m., she was no longer replying to her friend's messages, and attempts to call her phone went straight to voicemail. The sudden silence was alarming given how responsive Naomi typically was. She had planned to attend a young adults Bible study on Zoom at 7 o'clock. When her brother texted to ask where she was, there was no reply. Around 7:30, just 30 minutes after that Zoom meeting was supposed to begin, they contacted the Hollywood Police Department and reported their daughter missing. Now, I'm all for early reporting of missing people, but this does seem quite unusual to me. At least from what's publicly known, she hadn't responded to some text messages, and she was 30 minutes late for a non-essential Zoom meeting. Personally, I would still be thinking along the lines of maybe her phone ran out of battery as she lost track of time by 7:30. That said, given her diagnosis of autism, this may explain why her family was so eager to report her missing immediately. Police sprang into action surprisingly quickly given the timeline, and again I have to assume that this may have been due to the fact that Naomi is autistic. Officers hurriedly scoured the darkening park and surrounding areas that first night, but a 2-hour search under floodlights yielded nothing. By the next morning, dozens of volunteers, many from Naomi's Mormon church, were out canvassing the area and handing out flyers. They plastered missing person posters on street corners and trekked through the trails, desperate to find any clue of Naomi's whereabouts. Her father, Jose, scoured the area day and night on his own, methodically logging each place he searched as he refused to give up. Eventually, law enforcement also deployed canine units, drones, and helicopters to scour the 1,500-acre nature preserve. Despite these massive efforts, nothing turned up. No discarded belongings, no signs of a struggle, and no witnesses who saw her leave the park. Naomi had vanished into thin air among the mangroves and marshes she loved. Investigators did turn up a couple of puzzling clues, though none led to a resolution. Hollywood police discovered that on the night of February 11th, Naomi's cell phone pinged a tower near the Hollywood Beach boardwalk around 11. This was roughly 3 miles south of the Nature Center. Officers rushed to that area, but they found no sign of Naomi, and shortly afterward, her phone either died or was switched off. In the weeks that followed, there was no activity on her bank account or social media, suggesting she never accessed money or contacted anyone online after she vanished. In a strange twist about a month later, someone briefly powered on Naomi's phone and even initiated a group text chat with a few of her friends. However, the person who did this sent no messages and then shut the phone off again, never to turn it back on again. This bizarre event raised hopes that Naomi might still be alive, or at least that someone had her phone, but ultimately, it revealed nothing. Some have suggested, including a private investigator hired by her family, that Naomi left on her own accord to start a new life. This idea gained significant traction because weeks passed with no evidence of kidnapping or any crime whatsoever. Notably, the National Missing Persons Database entry says that the authorities don't believe that foul play was involved in this case, but I'll be coming back to that shortly. The private investigator noted that Naomi had been grappling with serious inner conflicts regarding her faith. He speculated that these struggles might have driven her to escape the strict expectations of her church and family life. Indeed, the fact that police found no signs of foul play, no struggle, no suspect, no crime scene, gives some weight to the runaway theory. However, those who know Naomi strongly dispute this theory. She left home that day with no money, no credit cards, and not even an ID on her. Nothing one would take if planning to be gone long. Close friends insist she wasn't the type to suddenly run off without a word, and she never expressed any desire to leave home or cut ties. That said, if she had been doubting her Mormon faith and her involvement in that community, it seems unlikely to me that she would be expressing those ideas to true believers. There are a number of credible theories about what happened to Naomi. Naomi's loved ones have feared from the start that a predator might have crossed her path that day. The nature park and the nearby boardwalk were open to the public, so a stranger could have approached her even in daylight. Given Naomi's trusting nature, her social maturity was akin to that of a young teenager according to her family. She might have been especially vulnerable to manipulation or deceit. Her family worries that she could have been taken against her will, perhaps even targeted by traffickers. However, investigators haven't uncovered any solid evidence to confirm an abduction and clearly doubt this theory, putting them at odds with the family. There were no eyewitnesses or reports of a disturbance at the park, and no clear clues on surveillance cameras aside from the bus video. Of course, it's possible an abductor lured Naomi away without anyone noticing. The late-night ping of her phone by the beach is intriguing. Maybe someone drove her or at least moved her phone to that spot, but it ultimately revealed nothing concrete. Another theory is that Naomi's disappearance resulted from a tragic accident in the wild. The Ankolb Nature Center is full of mangrove thickets and waterways, and it's possible she wandered off the trail and got into trouble out of sight. She might have slipped, fallen into water, or even encountered a dangerous animal. But this scenario seems less likely given what followed. The intensive searches with dogs, drones, and volunteers found no trace of Naomi within the park. Moreover, her phone's later location near the boardwalk suggests she did make it out of the preserve that evening, or at the very least, her phone did. Unless something or someone carried her phone there without her, it implies Naomi left the park area, one way or another. While an accident can't be completely ruled out, most view it as unlikely due to the lack of evidence and the phone data pointing away from the wilderness. While it's completely speculative at this time, others suggest that she was a voluntary runaway. According to this theory, she may have been questioning who she was attracted to, and this could have caused problems with her deeply religious family. According to this theory, Naomi didn't wipe her search history before her disappearance, and there were a whole bunch of questions about the status of gay people in Mormonism. There are numerous claims online that she was taken into an unofficial program designed for people who want to part ways with the Mormon Church. That said, these claims are unsubstantiated and may not have any basis in reality. However, I find this highly unlikely, given that there's an active Name Us database entry for her case. This database is run by the Department of Justice and is designed to be used by law enforcement to share information on missing people. Naomi was an adult when she went missing, and there's nothing stopping an adult from simply leaving. If she left voluntarily through such a group, as has been speculated, I don't see why they wouldn't have simply reached out to the authorities to call off the search. Nearly 5 years later, Naomi Bolivar's fate is still unknown, and her case remains an unsolved mystery. Hollywood police say they have never closed the investigation and still welcome any new tips as to her whereabouts. On the afternoon of February 9, 1989, a 20-year-old University of Florida junior named Tiffany Sessions told her roommate she was heading out for a power walk. It was something she'd been doing regularly since returning from Christmas break, a daily routine along a familiar route near her off-campus apartment in Gainesville. She left sometime between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, wearing red sweatpants, a white pullover sweatshirt with Aspen printed on the collar, and tennis shoes. She had a black Sony Walkman and a distinctive two-tone Rolex watch on her wrist. She didn't take her wallet, her keys, or her identification. She expected to return within the hour, but she never came back, and by around 7 that evening, Tiffany's roommate, Kathleen Frezza, knew something was wrong. She drove along Tiffany's usual walking route, searching for any sign of her. When she found nothing, she called the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, and then Tiffany's parents, Patrick and Hillary Sessions. It was the beginning of one of the largest missing person searches in the history of Florida, and a case that more than 3 decades later still hasn't been fully resolved. Tiffany Sessions was born on October 29, 1968, and her mom, who was in the Air Force, largely raised her on her own as they moved around the country. By the time she reached college, Tiffany had grown into an independent and driven young woman. She was studying finance at the University of Florida, with ambitions of one day running her own company. Her father, Patrick, was a prominent South Florida real estate developer who oversaw some of the largest building projects in the state, and she hoped to work with him one day. She lived in the Casablanca East condominiums on Southwest 35th Place, about 5 miles from the main campus. In what would later be seen as a potential vector of attack, her walking route took her along a wooded stretch of road near clusters of student apartment buildings. In 1989, there was no standardized protocol for missing persons cases in Florida. Hillary later recalled that investigators initially suggested Tiffany might simply be out with friends, a response she found frustrating because it didn't match her daughter's character. There was no evidence of a struggle at Tiffany's apartment, and no indication she'd left the parking lot area voluntarily for any extended trip. Some witnesses reported seeing a woman matching Tiffany's description, speaking to individuals inside a vehicle near her walking route, and the woman may have gotten into the car. However, the witnesses weren't certain, and authorities never confirmed whether the person was actually Tiffany. What was clear from the start was that despite what the cops initially said, this wasn't a voluntary disappearance. Her personal belongings were still in her apartment. Her car was still parked outside. Everything pointed to someone taking her against her will. If the initial law enforcement response was slow to gain traction, Tiffany's father more than compensated. Patrick Sessions threw every resource and connection he had into finding his daughter. Within a week of Tiffany's disappearance, he organized a massive search that even included members of the Miami Dolphins. Volunteers wore white t-shirts emblazoned with Tiffany's name and a toll-free hotline number, and at the peak of the campaign, that hotline was receiving up to 600 calls a day. Patrick didn't stop there, retaining the services of a team of private investigators that specialized in missing persons cases. He got Tiffany's picture printed inside every pizza delivery box in Alachua County so that everyone would be familiar with her appearance. He organized a press conference featuring Dolphins quarterback Dan Marino, John Walsh, and future Florida Governor Jeb Bush, launching the case into the national spotlight. When the local sheriff's office advised that people were trying to contact them by fax, but that they didn't have a fax machine, Patrick bought one for their office. Her case appeared on national television, and Patrick offered a hefty $250,000 reward for information on his daughter. Despite this massive private investigation along with the public investigation, the effort tragically turned up nothing. For years, a convicted criminal named Michael Christopher Knickerbocker drew attention as a possible suspect. Knickerbocker was serving 5 consecutive life sentences for a series of brutal crimes against women and girls. While in prison, he reportedly told fellow inmates that he'd slain Tiffany, claiming he'd chained her to a tree near Gainesville. He claimed that he later disposed of her body in the Caloosahatchee River near Fort Myers. He also claimed her sweatshirt was buried outside of Gainesville, and in 2002, a blood-soaked garment was found in the area. The results of forensic testing on that piece of clothing was never released, and there's nothing to indicate that it was related to the case at this point. Patrick Sessions himself went public in 1994 with his belief that Knickerbocker was involved. But upon further investigation, there was a significant problem when it turned out Knickerbocker wasn't living in Gainesville at the time of Tiffany's disappearance. His known crimes were all committed near victims who lived proximate to him, and investigators began to have doubts. I assume they also had some other reasons to suspect he wasn't involved, but given that this is an active and ongoing investigation, we may never know. When directly confronted by detectives, Knickerbocker never confessed to the crime, but he did provide some information. He admitted to writing an anonymous letter claiming responsibility, though he wouldn't speak on his motives for this. In my view, I suspect that this guy was just a sicko who, having been locked up for life, wanted a way to further victimize innocent people. Also, I say this with the benefit of hindsight, since the other prime suspect seems to fit the fact scenario of her case much better than Knickerbocker. The real breakthrough came decades later, driven in part by a woman who'd never forgotten the case. Sadie Darnell had been an employee of the Alachua County Sheriff's Office when Tiffany disappeared in 1989. Though she was never assigned to the case, she stayed in touch with Patrick Sessions over the years, sending him letters of encouragement. When Darnell was elected sheriff in 2006, she established the county's first cold case unit, with Tiffany's case being marked as high priority. The key development began in 2012, when advancing forensic technology allowed investigators to link DNA evidence to a man named Paul Rawls. But this wasn't in connection to Tiffany's case, but rather in connection to the slaying of Elizabeth Foster. Foster was a 21-year-old Santa Fe Community College student whose body was found in a shallow grave in 1992. She was found roughly a mile from where Tiffany had disappeared 3 years earlier. Interestingly, Hillary Sessions had always believed the two cases were connected, and it turned out she may have been right. Paul Rawls had a deeply troubled history. Born in 1948 in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, he grew up in a severely dysfunctional household. His father, a veteran, was extremely violent, and his mother suffered from serious mental illness and was in and out of institutions. In 1972, Rawls entered Linda Fida's Miami apartment and strangled her. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but under the light sentencing laws of the era, he was paroled in 1985. After his release, he moved to the Gainesville area, where he worked for a company that delivered construction equipment. That job placed him directly along the route Tiffany Sessions walked every afternoon, and chillingly, records showed that Rawls didn't report to work the day Tiffany vanished. If he was the perpetrator, given that Tiffany had a fairly set schedule for her power walks, he could have lurked in the woods waiting for her to come by. In 1994, Rawls kidnapped a 15-year-old girl from her family's apartment in Clearwater, binding her with duct tape after forcing her into his car at knife point. He drove her 200 miles away to Jacksonville, where it became apparent that he wasn't going to let her live. But in a moment of remarkable courage, the teenager managed to escape by unlocking the front door and moving a tire he'd used to barricade it while he wasn't looking. She remains the only known survivor among Rawls's victims, and for this crime he was convicted of kidnapping and indecent assault and sentenced to 19 years in prison. Now I just have to jump in here with my personal commentary, since at this point he was already convicted in relation to the Linda Fida case. I really have to question how someone like this was only given 19 years, meaning that he could have very likely been out prowling the streets once again. Thankfully, though, Roll's reign of terror was effectively over since he died of lung cancer in prison in February 2013. After his death, investigators gained access to items from his cell, including a calendar and address book that cataloged his victims. The book listed Linda Fita as his first crime, and also contained what appeared to be a reference to Elizabeth Foster. It also contained the notation, Number 2, February 9th, 1989, which investigators believe referred to the date of Tiffany Sessions' disappearance and identified her as Roll's second victim. I'll come back to this in a second, though, since I don't think this necessarily is as strong circumstantial evidence as the cops believe it is. In February 2014, exactly 25 years after Tiffany disappeared, Sheriff Darnell held a press conference announcing Rolls as the prime suspect. She described the circumstantial evidence as overwhelming, though she acknowledged that a direct connection between Rolls and Tiffany didn't exist. Investigators conducted extensive searches in areas associated with Rolls' other crimes, including a 2-week dig near the site where Foster's body had been found. At one point, sniffer dogs gave strong alerts at several spots, but further excavation revealed the dogs had been reacting to buried septic tanks from an old trailer park. Additional searches in 2020 on a tract of commercial timberland, prompted by tips matching the descriptions of Tiffany and Rolls, also yielded no new evidence. Notably, Tiffany's Rolex watch has been flagged by the manufacturer so that any attempt to sell or pawn it will trigger a notification, but it's never surfaced. Her body has never been found, and she's been excluded from over 150 Jane Doe cases across the United States. Personally, I think the big break may come from that flagged Rolex, which may still be owned by an entirely innocent party. This is speculation on my part, but I suspect he may have sold it for pennies on the dollar immediately after the crime. Perhaps one day the owner of that watch, or their relative, might attempt to sell it, which could trigger a break that confirms Rolls as the culprit. As for that diary connection, I think it's possible that Rolls may have sought to claim an additional victim without actually being involved. We know that he was the sort of person who took pride in his sick acts, and he may have sought to inflate his victim count, as many individuals like this tend to do. That said, this has to be balanced against the fact that he was absent from work on the day she disappeared, as well as his prior and subsequent crimes. If you'd walked through the streets of Key West, Florida in the late 1970s, you would have noticed something strange. Tourists and locals alike were wearing novelty t-shirts printed with a single baffling question: where is Bum Fardo? To visitors, it probably looked like a joke. To the people who actually lived on the island, the name Bum Farto carried a weight that went far deeper than novelty merchandise. It was a name tied to power, corruption, and one of the most chilling vanishing acts in Florida's criminal history. Nearly 50 years later, nobody's been able to answer the question on those shirts so many years ago. Joseph Anthony Fardo was born on July 3, 1919 in Key West. He grew up across the street from Fire Station No. 1 on Green Street, and as a kid he was constantly hanging around the place, fetching coffee for the firefighters and shining their shoes. The men at the station started calling him the Little Bum because of his habit of always doing odd jobs and then asking for small favors in return. Perhaps because of the comedic association with his highly unusual last name, that nickname stuck for life. When his father died in 1937, Fardo dropped out of school and went to work at a local funeral home. But the fire station was always where his heart was. He became a fireman in 1942, worked his way up through the ranks, and was finally promoted to fire chief in 1964. He was now taking over a 4-truck, 40-man department that had fascinated him his entire life. Fardo didn't waste time once he had the top job. He modernized the department, outfitting his men with improved bunker coats, the latest gas masks, and self-contained breathing tanks. He introduced fire prevention education, implemented training incentives, and created service award pins for his firefighters. He was universally seen as a competent chief who was able to manage the department well. A profile in the Miami Herald described him as a restless, excessively alert man who didn't seem natural sitting behind a desk. By all accounts, he was a beloved community figure on an island where earning genuine respect wasn't easy. But Farto was also a showman. He was frequently seen cruising around Key West in a lime green Ford Galaxy 500 with mirrored tint and chrome hubcaps. The words El Jefe were also displayed on the vehicle, in what was believed to be a nod to his Spanish ancestry. However, given the business he would eventually get himself tied up in, this was one of the facts the media and prosecutors trotted out to make him out to be a kingpin. Also, just as a quick aside, as I was editing, I realized that I didn't mention what this name means in English. It's the chief. Perhaps like a fire chief. Perhaps like something a bit more. Notably, Farto's car wasn't the only thing that set him apart from the other residents of Key West. His style was quite unique, to say the least. He favored bright red leisure suits, rose-tinted glasses, gold jewelry, and large cigars, and his office at the station was decorated with pictures of his hero, John F. Kennedy. He was, in every sense, a larger-than-life character, and that flamboyance would eventually become part of the mythology that followed his downfall. By the late 1960s and early 70s, Key West had developed a remarkably casual attitude toward the drug trade. Coke and weed flowed through the island with little interference. Dealers operated more or less openly. The general feeling among many residents was that the illicit business was simply another part of the local economy. One detective was quoted at the time as saying coke was about as common as key lime pie, but Florida Governor Reuben Askew wasn't as relaxed about it. When reports of Key West's freewheeling drug culture reached him, he ordered an investigation. The result was Operation Conch, a joint undercover sting involving multiple federal and state agencies. At the center of the operation was an informant named Titus Walters, a local who knew Farto personally. Walters introduced Farto to an undercover agent named Larry Dollar, claiming Dollar was his cousin. Dollar offered Farto a gold diamond ring in exchange for an ounce of Colombian confetti. Farto agreed, but struggled to source the product, at one point handing over a bag of weed as a gesture of goodwill. This, of course, should perhaps have been the first sign that El Jefe wasn't quite the major player some thought he was. He eventually came through, delivering coke to Dollar at a Key West fire station, where another agent secretly photographed the exchange. The situation took a grim turn before the arrests even came. Titus Walters was found dead in his bathtub, shot twice in the head. Disturbingly, he had also been injected with a hot shot heavily laced with drain cleaner, a poison that may not have finished him off quick enough. Despite this, the operation moved forward. On September 9th, 1975, 28 agents descended on Key West, posing as karate enthusiasts in town for a tournament. Also right here, I have to question why there hasn't been a Netflix series on this operation yet, since this is just pure cinema. They fanned out in unmarked cars and began making arrests. Farto was the first one taken into custody, grabbed outside his home. Among those also arrested were Manny James, the city attorney and son of the police chief, and several other prominent figures. A crowd of roughly 200 people gathered outside the Monroe County Courthouse to watch suspects being brought in. Some onlookers reportedly applauded the agents, though others believed that the cheers were actually for the arrested men and not law enforcement. Farto was released on $25,000 bail, posted by a fellow defendant. His trial came in early February 1976, and it didn't go well for him. A jury convicted him of 1 count of selling weed and 2 counts of selling coke after just 30 minutes of deliberation. He was looking at a prison sentence of up to 31 years. For a 56-year-old man who'd spent his entire adult life on the small island, that was essentially the end of his life as he knew it. Notably, while the media made Bum Fardo out to be a kingpin at the time, there's very little evidence that he was anything more than a minor player. It's worth noting that Farto had difficulty even obtaining coke for the undercover agent during the sting, which doesn't exactly paint the picture of a major swinger in the industry. Days after his conviction, Fardo told his wife that he needed to take care of some business in Miami. His city vehicle had been confiscated, so he rented a Pontiac sedan and drove north on U.S. Route 1, the only road connecting Key West to the mainland. That was February 16, 1976. A few weeks later, the rental car was found abandoned in Miami. There was no sign of Bum Farto. He'd jumped his bail and vanished. The disappearance immediately became the talk of the island, and the t-shirts appeared almost right away, and one shop reportedly sold over 800 of them. The theories about what happened to Bum Farto have ranged from the plausible to the conspiratorial. The most widely discussed possibility is that he fled the country and settled in Central or South America. This theory gained some traction in 1980 when reports surfaced that Farto had been spotted at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. 6 residents of the town of Golfito claimed they recognized him, and authorities believed he may have lived there until around 1979, when American fugitives began being expelled. However, none of these accounts were confirmed, and the trail went cold, if there was ever a meaningful trail to begin with. Notably, others have suggested that he'd fled to Spain, given that he was fluent in the language, and his parents were from the country. That said, there's no evidence to support this, but if he did, in 1976, Spain was in a period of political turmoil, and he may have been able to simply blend in. Others believed Farto met a grimmer end. Some locals were convinced that dealers had eliminated him to keep him quiet, possibly dumping his body in the ocean. He was functionally facing spending the rest of his life in prison, a big step down from being one of the most respected people in Key West. Ultimately, there's no proof that he ever cooperated with the authorities or sought out a deal. However, as with other cases like this, it's important to remember that there doesn't actually have to be any deal in place. He may have simply been seen as someone who could be a liability in the future, especially given his connections to law enforcement. In 1986, a decade after the disappearance, Bum Farto was declared legally dead so that his wife could collect his pension and settle his estate. Notably, his wife received less than $10,000 from his estate, which again suggests that he likely wasn't a heavy hitter in the trafficking game. That said, it's of course possible that he was able to get his money out of the country, perhaps to Costa Rica or Spain, where he lived out the remainder of his life quietly.